100 forgotten dishes that made the 1950s magical. The kitchen door always creaked in that familiar way as you slipped inside, barefoot on the cool linoleum. Nobody cared if your feet were sticky from the spilled juice. You darted straight to the counter, eyes on the cookie jar or the leftover cake on the table. Parents didn't schedule your snacking. They just told you to wash your hands before dinner. You made your own fun. Thirsty? You gulped cold tap water from the kitchen sink. Hungry? You raided the fridge for half a sandwich or a slice of cheese. It was unsupervised magic from breakfast to bedtime. You balanced on stool rungs, sniffed steaming casseroles, and nibbled snacks while waiting for the oven timer to ding. And no one worried. No phones, no kitchen rules beyond, "Don't burn the toast." Just you, the smell of fresh bread, and the world of culinary possibilities feeling endless. Somehow, you always managed to sneak a bite without getting caught, and the morning light slips across the linoleum like it's trying to wake you up gently. The faint hum of the refrigerator mixes with the pop and click of the chrome toaster, and you know exactly what comes next. You grab the cereal box and shake it just enough to hear that crinkly rustle, the promise of something sweet inside. Frosted flakes tumble into your bowl, each flake catching the light like tiny golden sails. You pour milk over them, and it spills over the edges just slightly, a little mess you secretly love. From across the room, the toaster springs, and Eggo waffles pop up like little golden clouds. You reach for them with sticky fingers, butter melting instantly as it hits the hot surface. The smell curls through the kitchen, mixing with the faint aroma of sugar from sugar smacks, and suddenly the morning feels like magic. You remember dipping your toast into warm milk or sprinkling a little extra sugar on top, feeling like a tiny chef, experimenting with the day's first masterpiece. You glance at the counter and see pre-sliced cheese toast, ready to go, the edges perfectly even, as if some invisible hand had anticipated your hunger. The tangy scent of Del Monte fruit cocktail drifts from the open can, and you scoop a spoonful, letting the syrup drip down your chin before anyone notices. Each bite feels like a reward, a tiny celebration of something so ordinary it hardly seemed noticed at the time. The kitchen buzzes softly with small appliances and quiet conversations, parents humming, siblings clattering dishes, the world outside still waking up. Even the simplest meals were packed with wonder. You remember how cereal boxes promised adventures, puzzles, jokes, tiny prizes hidden inside the wrappers. Every bite was colorful, sweet, and full of life. Mornings weren't rushed errands. They were little ceremonies, a prelude to the day's adventures. The smell of toast, the crunch of cereal, the syrupy fruit dripping from your spoon. These were small moments that stayed in memory long after the bowls were empty. And then there were the desserts, the early signs of a cultural explosion that would define the decade. You could see it in the bright packaging on the shelves, the way every sweet treat seemed to wink at you from the counter, hinting at afternoons filled with ice cream cones, puddings, and baked goodies that didn't just satisfy hunger. They promised joy, fun, and the kind of innocence that made the 1950s morning unforgettable. You step into the kitchen, and the sweet scent hits you instantly, thick and warm, curling around your shoulders like a hug. Betty Crocker cake mix boxes line the counter, their colorful wrappers promising golden layers in minutes. You pour the mix into a bowl, add the eggs and water, and the batter glimmers under the morning light. Butter sizzles as it melts in the pan, and you know the house will soon smell like pure comfort. You remember hovering nearby as your mom slid a tray of Pepperidge Farm cookies onto the cooling rack, the edges crisp, the center soft, each one a tiny triumph that felt like it had been made from scratch. Slice and bake dough waits patiently on the counter, a tube of convenience that somehow feels magical. You slice around, pop it onto the cookie sheet, and as it bakes, the smell spreads into every corner of the house. Even neighbors passing by could probably tell what was cooking. You recall the pride your mother felt, presenting these treats to family gatherings as if she had spent all morning mixing, rolling, and kneading herself. It was the kind of pride that made you feel the kitchen was a place of wonder, a small stage where ordinary ingredients became celebrations. The shortcuts didn't feel like cutting corners, they felt like tiny miracles. Kitchens transformed into bakeries, ovens humming like busy little engines. You watch the golden crusts form, the sugar caramelizing, and somehow each baked good carries a memory of laughter, sticky fingers, and the quiet thrill of indulgence. The aroma alone was enough to gather everyone around the table, teasing appetites and building excitement before the first bite. Even dessert plates felt like part of a ritual. A slice of cake, a cookie, a scoop of slice-and-bake dough turned into sweet rounds, all arranged carefully, like a promise kept. You remember the delight of sharing these with siblings, the quick grabs between adults, the way everyone savored these store-bought wonders as if they were homemade treasures. Every bite carried warmth, comfort, and a sense of family that seemed bigger than the kitchen itself. And while the sugar and butter wrapped the home in nostalgia, it was also part of a bigger cultural shift. Mass market sweets were no longer just a treat, they were a revolution, blending modern convenience with traditional pride. You could smell it, taste it, feel it in the clatter of dishes and chatter around the table. Every cookie, cake, and pastry was a tiny celebration of the 1950s kitchen, bridging the past and the present while paving the way for the candy culture that would soon dominate afternoons and imaginations alike. You step off the curb and the bell above the candy store door jingles like a signal to adventure. The air inside smells of sugar and chocolate, warm and heavy, curling around you as you take it all in. Shelves groan under the weight of bright wrappers, pastel peeps lined up like tiny marshmallow soldiers, good news bars stacked like shiny treasures, and little glass jars overflowing with peanut M&Ms that glimmered like coins in the sunlight. You reach for a handful, and the colors spill into your palm, sticky fingers already anticipating the first bite. You remember the thrill of choosing just the right treat, the delicate negotiation with pennies in your pocket. Each candy felt like a tiny victory, a secret prize that belonged only to you until it was shared, or traded, with a friend at school. You held the chewy squares to your lips, savoring the sugar, the chocolate, the crunch, and the moment that seemed to stretch forever. The candy store wasn't just a place, it was a kingdom of tiny joys, a place where childhood felt endless and every corner promised a new delight. The shelves were dizzying, stacked with jars of gumdrops, licorice ropes, and taffy twisted like rainbows. You could hear the wrappers crinkle before unwrapping, that small sound amplifying the anticipation. The colors, the scents, the textures, they all wrapped together into memories that made afternoons feel bright and endless. Even the smallest purchase carried a sense of independence, of secret adventure, and the unspoken understanding that life could be sweet, simple, and completely yours for a few cents. You remember sneaking a chocolate bar behind your desk, or swapping a handful of jelly beans with a friend. Every bite carried laughter, whispers, and the joy of tiny indulgences. The candy store shaped your days, decorating your childhood with color, texture, and taste that seemed impossible to forget. You could feel the sticky sweetness clinging to your fingers, the thrill of choosing, sharing and hoarding treasures that were gone too quickly but lingered in memory. And while pocket-sized treats gave daily pleasure, they hinted at a larger indulgence waiting in diners and dinner parties. Pastry stacked high, sundaes dripping with whipped cream, desserts presented like jewels. This was the next step from the candy jars, a world where sugar ruled and imagination ran wild. The small treasures of the corner shop led naturally to these showier delights, bridging the innocent joy of childhood with the decadent treats that would dominate every sweet-loving afternoon. You open the freezer, and the cold air rushes out like a tiny wind of promise. Rows of Swanson TV dinners gleam under the light, foil trays catching your eye like little metallic islands of possibility. You remember sliding one onto the oven rack, watching it spin under heat until the aroma of turkey, mashed potatoes, and corn filled the kitchen, all in less than half an hour. The idea that a complete meal could appear from a frozen box felt like magic, almost like stepping into the future without leaving home. Frozen pizzas sit stacked beside them, the cheese trapped under plastic like treasure waiting to melt. You recall how easy it was to pull one out, pop it into the oven, and wait for the crust to turn golden, the cheese bubbling, the pepperoni curling at the edges. Nights that might have meant hurried cooking or skipped meals became small celebrations, everyone gathering around the table to share something that once seemed impossible to make at home in minutes. Even the simplest toppings felt indulgent, and the smell alone was enough to make the family pause, noses twitching, anticipating that first savory bite. Ice cream cases spark another kind of wonder. Tiger tail, chocolate ripple, Neapolitan. Each pint promises a tiny adventure. You remember scooping a swirl into a bowl, the cold biting briefly before melting into creamy sweetness. These frozen delights could last weeks, even months, and each spoonful felt like a reward for surviving the day, a little piece of joy captured in cold perfection. You could hear the spoon scrape the bottom of the container and feel that mix of satisfaction and excitement, knowing the freezer held more treasures just waiting for discovery. The freezer didn't just store food, it reshaped how homes ran. Meals arrived faster, desserts lasted longer, and families felt a kind of futuristic convenience that made every dinner feel like a treat. You remember watching your parents marvel at how simple life had become, their pride in modern appliances blending with the nostalgia of home-cooked flavor. Even chores seemed lighter when the solution to hunger could be pulled from icy shelves in minutes. And while the kitchen held this new frozen wonder, it hinted at the bright neon of diner counters, where meals arrived hot, plated, and ready to eat. The magic of frozen trays and ice cream cases was the domestic version of the diner experience, bringing a sense of innovation and excitement to mid-century America. Every pop of the oven, every swirl of frozen cream, made the future feel closer, tastier, and wonderfully immediate. You step through those diner doors and suddenly you're hit by that sweet whirl of syrupy air, like a promise draped in neon glow. You see the jukebox in the corner, lights flickering mid-tune, and it feels like that moment when the music wraps around your laughter. You catch the faint zing of metallic plates sliding across formica, and in that second, your heart flips at the thought of the Whopper, layered with patty juice, crisp lettuce pressing through sesame seeds, the whole thing sturdy and warm in your hands. Your fingers graze the edge of a banana split, cold scoops melting into the pool of cherry-hued syrup, and the cherry on top catches your eye like a wink. You lean in and almost taste that blend of vanilla and strawberry and chocolate all fighting for your attention. Right next to it, the peach cobbler glistens, chunks of peach collapsing into bubbling golden sauce that clings to your spoon in lazy rivers, sticky and sweet, promising that gooey comfort you thought only existed in dreams. And then there's the Cheese Whiz, oozing from its little metal cup, a perfect mess that found its way onto crispy fries and burgers, its tangy glow shining under the diner's neon lights, somehow both ridiculous and brilliant. You remember how teenage voices bounced off the vinyl booths, full of wide-eyed jokes and first crush confessions, laughter making your chest tight with excitement. You lean over the counter, tray heavy with fries and sodas, and you feel that buzzing energy, like the whole world was brighter inside the diner's embrace. That buzzing rhythm of plates clattering, fries popping with steam, soda fizzing in cut glass glasses. Each sound becomes its own little memory you could taste. You follow someone's eyes across the counter to a first date, shy smiles tucked between bites of burger, and you feel the warmth cradle that moment. Something like hope, tangled in ketchup streaks on white napkins. The diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was a stage where you made a million tiny stories, a spoonful of cobbler shared between friends, a flicker of neon on your cheek, a drip of Cheese Whiz coating your finger that you licked off without a second thought. And you knew, deep down, that those glowing nights of laughter and sticky counters were what youth felt like, alive and messy and bright. The room seemed to hold its breath the moment that cake flipped from pan to platter. Pineapple rings gleamed like stained glass, cherries glowing in the center, sugar dripping down the edges in amber streaks. The smell of butter and caramel hung in the air, warm and sticky, pulling every eye to the table. For a second, the cake wasn't just dessert. It was a jewel, a centerpiece that made people lean closer in awe. Then the hush deepened as a server appeared with a mountain of meringue, the peaks brown just enough to hint at fire. Baked Alaska was a spectacle before it was ever a bite. You could feel the rush as the torch kissed the edges, golden flames licking the sugar while the ice cream inside stayed frozen solid. That shock of a hot meeting cold wasn't science class, it was theater, and you never forgot the first time you saw it melt and smoke all at once. Just when you thought the show was over, a skillet rolled out with bananas sizzling in butter and brown sugar. The air changed, sweet, heavy, with the sharp edge of rum. Then the match struck, and fire leapt high, blue and gold, wrapping around the fruit as gasps filled the room. Bananas Foster didn't just taste rich, it demanded applause. Vanilla ice cream trembled under the heat, turning into rivers of caramelized glory that slid across the plate like molten gold. It wasn't about hunger anymore. These dishes were parades on a table, flames dancing, sugar sparkling, ice holding strong against fire. The 1950s loved a bit of drama, and nothing said elegance like a flambéed that made guests lean back in surprise. Dinner parties became part stage play, part feast, and every bite carried the thrill of having witnessed something rare. The clink of glasses, the soft applause, the laughter that followed, it all wrapped into the memory of those nights. The food wasn't quiet or modest. It shouted, it glowed, it burned bright right in front of you. Each dish proved that the kitchen could be a theater, the table a spotlight, and for a moment everyone gathered felt swept up in the performance, savoring not just flavor but the luxury of the show itself. The pan popped as slices of Spam hit the heat, their edges curling, their pink sheen turning crisp and brown. That smell was salty and bold, a scent that carried across kitchens where quick meals were the norm. Spam had started in the late 1930s, but by the 1950s, it had claimed its spot on breakfast plates, tucked into sandwiches and diced into casseroles. A single blue can could stretch across a whole family meal, and its familiar sizzle felt like reassurance in a world racing toward modern convenience. On the table, a jar of Cheese Whiz waited with its glossy orange shine. One spoonful and it slid onto crackers like molten velvet, sharp and tangy, a shortcut that turned any snack into something new. Launched in 1952, it was born to save time in making Welsh rarebit, but it quickly jumped from pubs to suburban kitchens. Kids grinned at its neon glow while hosts used it to dress up celery sticks or drizzle over broccoli when they wanted something quick but flashy. Next to it, a red can of Chef Boyardee promised pasta night without the rolling pin or long simmering sauce. You opened it, and the smell of tomatoes and herbs filled the air. Inside were noodles already swimming in sauce, sometimes even a packet of grated cheese tucked along for sprinkling. Ettore Boiardi, the Italian chef behind the name, had begun selling his creations in the 1920s, and by mid-century those cans lined grocery shelves, giving families a taste of Italy at the turn of a can opener. And tucked away in spice racks was a little shaker of beau monde seasoning. The blend was savory and mysterious, a mix of celery seed, onion, and hints of clove and bay that turned sour cream into a dip worth gathering around. Sprinkled into meatloaf or over vegetables, it felt like a trick up the sleeve, a way to add sophistication without the effort. Just a dash, and suddenly the ordinary carried a new spark, a reminder that flavor could come from a jar as easily as from a garden. These weren't fussy or extravagant. They were practical marvels, everyday heroes of the pantry that shaped how mid-century America cooked and ate. When the casseroles came out of the oven, the kitchen turned into a stage. The sound of the serving spoon scraping glass, the sight of steam rising, the clink of plates being set in front of hungry faces. It was a ritual. No matter how simple the dish, it carried weight. It meant the family was together. You remember how everyone leaned in at once. A scoop of tuna noodle here, a pile of macaroni there, green beans tucked between. It didn't matter if it was Tuesday or Sunday, the meal felt complete when everyone's plate was full. The oven baked more than food. It baked security, and the table was where that warmth was shared. Casseroles were practical, but they were also personal. Families had little twists, extra onions on top, a dash of paprika, or that one secret ingredient that nobody ever revealed. You tasted it and thought, this is ours. It was frugal cooking, born from canned soup and shelf-stable goods, yet it turned into comfort food that never really left the American memory. After dinner, though, the rhythm shifted. The table cleared, plates stacked in the sink, and still, the appetite lingered. Kids reached for smaller bites, something crunchy, something sweet. That's where snacking culture began to slip in. Crackers stacked in a bowl, Jell-O molds chilling in the fridge, or a plate of cookies waiting in the tin. Television had a lot to do with it. Families gathered in the living room after supper, and suddenly, food wasn't just at the table. It followed you to the couch. Chips, popcorn, even little bowls of nuts started to appear as regular companions to evening shows. The casserole gave you comfort, but the snack gave you fun. Those two worlds, hearty one-dish meals and playful after-dinner bites, defined the 1950s kitchen. The oven carried the weight of family, and the snack bowl carried the spark of something new. Together, they painted the picture of home, warm, secure, and always with just a little more waiting once the plates were cleared. The crunch always came first. A bowl sat on the coffee table, and your hand dove in before anyone could say a word. Chex Mix was the star. Light cereal squares toasted with butter, Worcestershire, and just enough salt to keep you reaching for more. That recipe, born in kitchens and clipped from magazine ads, turned into a party essential. One handful and the mix of crisp cereal, nuts, and pretzels felt like mischief in your mouth. Chips were changing too. Plain salted bags had been around, but the 50s gave them company. Flavors started creeping in, each bite a little louder than the last. You tore open a bag, and suddenly the air filled with the smell of onion or barbecue, sharp enough to make your mouth water. At school lunches and neighborhood parties, twisted, salty, easy to grab. Kids munched them straight from tins while parents served them alongside cocktails. The salt dusted your fingers, the crunch echoed in your ears, and nobody could stop at just one. And then there were peanuts. Not fancy, just roasted, salted, poured into bowls like they had been waiting there all along. You cracked shells, popped them in, and licked the salt from your fingertips. They were cheap, filling, and always around. Snacks weren't just food. They were part of the soundtrack of the living room. A movie on the TV, friends crowding in, someone laughing with their mouth full of chips. It was easy, playful, and unplanned. The clatter of a bowl tipping, the quick scramble to save what spilled. It all felt like part of the fun. Every handful carried that sense of freedom. It wasn't dinner with rules and forks. It was grabbing, sharing, and eating with your hands. Like rules didn't apply for a while. A couch became a picnic spot, and even the quietest kid joined in once the crunch started. You stepped into the holiday glow, and the air hit you with that sweet zing of molded Jell-O, winking at you from the table. You reached out, glassy ridges cool under your fingers, fruit suspended like tiny jeweled surprises. You remembered how the wobbly jiggle made you giggle when Auntie plopped it down next to the roast. That neon wobble, that fruit surprise. It felt like magic. Then you spied the Easter peeps, lined up in soft pastel ranks, sugary sugar rain on tiny sugar marshmallows. You pinched one, sugar dust puffing like fairy dust in the air, and you felt your tongue tingle. It was saccharine, quaint, a sugar-buzzed hello from childhood celebrations. You glanced around. The fruit cocktail bowl sat like a bejeweled treasure trove, canned cherries gleaming, pineapple tidbits glistening, orange slices floating in syrup that caught the light. You dipped a spoon, aroma sticky sweet rising to your nose, and it felt silly and comforting all at once. You held the cold metal, felt its weight, and tasted that syrupy pop of canned fruit. Your eyes drifted to the rich cake, towering with frosting that looked like soft clouds you could sink into. The knife sliced, and the smell of vanilla and sugar rose, whispering of Grandma's hands frosting cake at midnight. You saw crumbs tumble. You remembered faces around that cake, smiles, Laughter, someone dribbling frosting at the corner of their mouth. The glow of holiday lights bounced off those dishes, each one a kitschy beacon of festive joy. You felt the warmth of bodies around the table, shared anticipation of tasting one more slice or scoop. That absurd, cheerful mix of colors and textures. The Jell-O candy-colored, the Peeps pastel-powdered, the fruit cocktail sparkling, the cake indulgent, made you feel like a kid again, in that warm, slightly tacky grown-up world of celebrations. You carried that feeling forward, each dish a memory snap of joy and togetherness, lighting up your heart like those glittery table lamps. And in that swirl of kitchen sweetness, you sensed something playful, something timeless, something that would carry you into summer treats ahead. The heat pressed down, and nothing saved you faster than a banana split, shining in its long glass dish. 3 scoops lined up like jewels, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, already dripping down the sides. A swirl of whipped cream sat proud, crowned with a bright cherry that begged to be plucked. You leaned in, the syrup smell thick, and let the cold shock hit your tongue while your hands grew sticky from the fudge sliding down the edges. Tiger tail ice cream showed up like a carnival trick. Orange ice cream streaked with black licorice, stripes twisting like a tiger's back. The first bite felt strange, citrus tang clashing with licorice bite, but the more you licked, the more you grinned. It was rare, special, something you only spotted in certain parlors, making it taste like victory just to hold the cone. Sundaes came next, tall glass dishes stacked with scoops until they nearly toppled. Hot fudge poured slowly, nuts sprinkled on top, a cherry sitting like a prize at the peak. You dug in, metal spoon cold in your hand, the clink against glass echoing under soda shop lights. Each bite mixed cream, crunch, and syrup, leaving trails of chocolate on your lips while laughter bounced around the booth. Then there were root beer floats, fizzy and alive, foam bubbling over the rim before you even had your straw in place. The first sip tickled your nose, soda sharp and sweet, blending into the soft melt of vanilla. The chilled mug sweated in your palm, droplets running down your wrist while you tried to catch the overflow with quick gulps. Every scoop melted faster than you could eat, drips racing down cones, running sticky between your fingers. Friends teased each other, daring you to finish before the sun won. The air was loud with shouts, the clatter of spoons, the sizzle of summer heat fighting against every frozen bite. Those banana splits, tiger stripes, sundaes, and foaming floats weren't just desserts. They were the flavor of freedom, the taste of afternoon stretched wide open, of laughter rolling out under a blazing sky. A whole season of joy sat in those melting scoops, pointing the way toward the tall, frosted glasses that soon defined an era of drinks all their own. The first sip hit cold and sweet, a frothy crown of malted milk swirling in a tall glass. You could taste that toasty malt powder, first mixed in the late 1800s as a health drink, now turned into a soda shop star. Metal cups clinked against the counter while the shake spun thick inside. A long spoon slid down, catching chocolate at the bottom, and you grinned as the foam tickled your lip. Teenagers leaned on stools at the malt shop, jukebox humming behind them. The Walgreens clerk who thought to toss ice cream into malted milk back in 1922, unknowingly, handed kids a ritual. Dates started with 2 straws in 1 glass, laughter spilling out between sips. Every shake felt like a badge of youth, rich and cool enough to make the summer heat vanish. Mornings carried a different rhythm. Dunkin' Donuts brewed its first pots of coffee in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1948, the steam rising with the smell of roasted beans. Donuts lined the racks, glazed and ready, while hot mugs fueled workers before long shifts. Coffee wasn't just caffeine. It was comfort, a warm hand wrapped around your morning. Each sip pulled you awake. Each dunk into a donut sealed the name into memory. Afternoons belonged to soda fountains. Counters gleamed with chrome, syrup bottles stacked like colorful potions. You heard the hiss of carbonation as orange crush fizzed into tall glasses. Born in 1911 with real orange pulp in its early recipe, it poured bright and tangy, a rush of citrus bubbles chasing down the sweetness. Kids pressed their faces to the glass, waiting for the first sip, while pharmacists turned soda jerks kept the laughter flowing with every pour. And in classrooms, it was chocolate milk cartons that turned ordinary lunches into something special. Cold cartons slid across long tables, the cardboard bending under eager fingers. You pierced the straw, that first pull mixing cocoa sweetness with creamy chill. It wasn't just a drink, it was the pause in the middle of the day, the signal that school could wait a minute longer while you savored that little box of joy. Each glass, mug, and carton carried more than liquid. They carried moods, rituals, and identity. Malted shakes marked afternoons at the counter. Coffee gave mornings their heartbeat. Orange Crush brought the fizz of friendship. Chocolate milk sweetened school days. Together, they weren't just drinks. They were the soundtrack of life, bubbling, steaming, and swirling into the culture that shaped a generation. You remember the first time the Whopper showed up on the menu? A burger so big it barely fits in your hands, its sesame seed bun warm and soft, the flame-grilled beef spilling juices with every bite. Burger King launched it in 1957, a bold move that set off a fast food rivalry, and for just 37 cents you could taste something larger than life. Road trips carried another promise. On the horizon you'd spot that bright orange roof of Howard Johnson's, a beacon for hungry families. Inside, waitresses served fried clam strips with golden batter so crisp you could hear the crunch across the table. Jacques Pepin had helped perfect the freezing process, which meant those clams tasted like the ocean even in the middle of the Midwest. And the ice cream, 28 flavors lined up in neat rows, making kids press their noses to the glass in pure wonder. Back at home, something new was sliding into ovens across the country. Frozen pizza. No reservations, no waiting. Just open the box, heat it up, and dinner was ready. The crust turned crisp, the cheese bubbled and stretched, and families marveled at the idea that a meal could be pulled from the freezer and still feel special. Convenience had entered the kitchen, and it wasn't leaving. Mornings shifted too. Dunkin' Donuts began brewing strong coffee and frying up pastries that people grabbed on the way to work. A paper cup warming your hands, a donut coated in sugar, the smell of fresh grounds filling the shop. It became part of the daily rhythm. No longer just a sit-down breakfast. It was breakfast to go, a small comfort before stepping into the day. Together, these chains reshaped the way America ate. Burgers the size of your appetite, clam strips on cross-country highways, frozen pizzas glowing under oven light, and coffee and donut mornings that set the pace of modern life. The food was quick, predictable, and everywhere you turned. There was an excitement in that, a taste of the future. But there was also a quiet tug, a reminder that not every meal had to be fast, and that sometimes the best memories were still waiting back at the living room table. The clink of glasses filled the room before the food even hit the table. Cocktail parties were where neighbors turned into showmen, each dish a little performance. A silver tray carried deviled eggs, their bright yolks dusted with paprika like tiny fireworks on a plate. You'd grab one, and before you even swallowed, another platter would slide into view. The cheese ball sat like a crown jewel, rolled in nuts, waiting to be attacked with crackers. Everyone laughed as it slowly crumbled away, bite by bite. A chilled shrimp cocktail appeared, the red sauce sharp with horseradish, the shrimp dangling like ornaments on glass. One dip and your nose tingled, but you always went back for more. Beaumont dip sat nearby, creamy and mysterious, the kind of thing you couldn't stop scooping even if you didn't know what was in it. The drinks made everything shine a little brighter. Ice cubes clinked against glass, olives sank into martinis, and you felt grown up even if your drink was just a Shirley Temple with extra cherries. Music played in the background, sometimes jazz, sometimes pop, and the living room became its own little nightclub. When the party slowed, the kitchen became the stage. The TV dinner tray, once a novelty, turned into the ultimate late-night fix. Peeling back the foil, the smell of reheated gravy filled the air. The mashed potatoes sat in their perfect square, never quite as fluffy as homemade, but that was part of the charm. A brownie in the corner burned on top, gooey in the middle, and somehow still irresistible. Other nights it was colder, sneakier. A Spam sandwich slapped together in the glow of the refrigerator light, the meat salty and slick, the bread sticking to the roof of your mouth. Sometimes it was just potato chips poured straight into a bowl, eaten with the kind of hunger only midnight can bring. That mix of elegance and mischief defined the moment. By day, it was shrimp cocktails and fancy dips. By night, it was cold leftovers, eaten in silence while the house slept. Both felt like little adventures, stitched into the rhythm of ordinary life. And in the middle of it all, there was sweetness, simple bites that made even the quietest hours feel alive. The smell of a casserole coming out of the oven always carried more than just dinner. It felt like comfort wrapped in steam, a whole family waiting at the table with expectant faces. That bubbling dish of tuna, noodles, and crushed potato chips wasn't fancy, but it spoke of togetherness. You remember the way Jell-O molds wobbled in the center of the table like colorful jewels, turning dessert into a performance. Lime green, cherry red, sometimes layered with whipped cream or even fruit cocktail. It was edible optimism, shimmering under the dining room light. Then there were the sweet finishes that seemed to stretch time. Angel food cake, impossibly light, topped with strawberries. Banana cream pie with its golden crust and creamy filling. Root beer floats that fizzed so high you had to slurp before it spilled over. Each bite felt like celebration, even on an ordinary night. Some flavors belonged to simple pleasures. A grilled cheese sandwich paired with Campbell's tomato soup made rainy days feel safe. Peanut butter and jelly, packed in wax paper, tasted like freedom on the schoolyard. Even a cold glass of Ovaltine before bed carried a soft promise that tomorrow would be just as sweet. And then there were the splurges that felt downright glamorous. Shrimp cocktail in frosted glasses, cheese balls rolled in nuts and set proudly on trays, deviled eggs that disappeared faster than they could be refilled. Entertaining in the 50s wasn't just about feeding people. It was about style, about showing creativity through food. Not every dish survived. Some recipes faded with time, tucked into old cookbooks and yellowed index cards. But others carried on, becoming classics that still find their way onto tables. Burgers, milkshakes, chocolate chip cookies. These were never just trends, they were habits of joy. What lingers most isn't the recipe, but the feeling. The kitchen radio humming softly, the clatter of Pyrex bowls, the hum of the refrigerator in the background. Food in the 1950s wasn't just about eating, it was about belonging, about laughter, about the comfort of knowing you were home. And if you close your eyes, you can almost taste it still. The sweetness, the salt, the sparkle of those nights and afternoons. The flavor of the 1950s didn't end. It settled in memory where it still lingers, warm and unforgettable.